Not many sermons will come with a warning label, but I do feel the need to start today with a caveat. I'm going to be punching above my weight class this morning, and given my size, that is saying something. I'm going to be saying some disparaging things about serotonin drugs and the whole universe of antidepressants, sleep aids, and other allegedly mood-altering prescription medications. And so I want to say no one should ever change the medications that you take solely based on what you hear me say. Changes in psychoactive drugs should always be done in close consultation with your prescribing physician. Anything else may in fact have deadly results. With that being said, the game is afoot. When Dr. Paul Tomlinson and I were on the road in April doing a series of conferences in South Carolina, our conversations kept drifting back to this book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari, and the insights that it offers into the treatment of addiction, about suicide prevention, and the treatment of most common forms of depression. Depression comes in lots of flavors. There are people whose brains are simply wired for depression, and they struggle with it chronically. But there are many other kinds that are episodic or caused by life circumstances. So we realized that the two of us, in spite of the conference that we were doing, that we were excited about, we really wanted to do a conference about vital connections. And we wanted to approach it differently from the lecture-based conferences that we've done in the past. The premise of this book is that the real treatment for depression, the best suicide prevention, the most effective treatment for addiction, and in many ways, the best ways to address sleep disorders, obesity, several neurotic conditions, is to strengthen the connections between individuals with their family, with their friends, with their coworkers, and with their neighbors, and to strengthen connections to meaningful work, spiritual values, and to nature. So we don't want to invite people to come to a conference to just hear me and Paul talk about these things. We want to help them to practice them so that they will learn how to make better connections. I'm encouraging all of our church members to plan to participate in this conference. It'll be held the first weekend of August, beginning Friday night, August 2nd, going to Sunday morning the 4th. It'll be held here at our church in Springfield. But I'm especially wanting to encourage our listeners to come. Every year, some of our enthusiastic internet-connected members come from South Carolina and South Dakota, California, New York, Kentucky, Florida, Louisiana, and sometimes even from England and Scotland to be a part of this event. Now, we have a very simple, plain building in this typically very dull Midwestern city, but the people that you will meet when you come here are some of the most fascinating, and if I may say so, intelligent and good-looking people that you will encounter anywhere. Yeah, same. You would tell me if it wasn't so, wouldn't you? David Ketchum will lead us in mindful movement, an exercise developed by Thich Nhat Hanh. Music therapist Harry Beckett will lead us in drum circles. Molly Estes, the most photogenic of our lineup, will lead us in seated yoga, though not seated in this way. We're talking about in a chair. Sean Spires and Harry will work together on group singing and musical aspects of meditation. There will be a few lectures delivered by my good friend Dr. Jim Davis on positive psychology, and some further input from Dr. Tomlinson and me. To fit all of these activities in, we have crowded out the lectures from all trying to be squeezed into that first weekend in August, and we have made them our 4 sermon posts for the month of July. So I'm going to ask everyone that's going to participate to pay attention to what I'm saying today. Next Sunday, Dr. Tomlinson and I will share this microphone to talk about addiction, depression, and suicide. On July 21st, David Ketchum will speak about how connections to things, possessions, undermines our connection to people and to nature. And on the last Sunday in July, I'll speak directly to strengthening connections to our values, and particularly within faith communities. So if you're driving in to attend this event, you can catch all of these talks on iTunes podcast under the title Progressive Faith Sermons. Admission is free, but we do need to plan for meals and supplies. So if you'll just write to me at reverend.ray@aol.com to let me know that you're coming, I will appreciate that very much. As we begin this important series, I felt it was only honest of me to put myself in the topic. I don't like to use myself as a sermon illustration, but in this case, I don't want any of you to have the impression that I'm a sage on a stage talking down to you. I'm a part of this. All of my life, I've had an episodic relationship with sleep, but for most of my adult life, I've also had to really struggle with my weight, sometimes winning that battle for years at a time, and others going through long periods of time without success. I have had some very difficult times in my life. I've been through a divorce and a related bankruptcy. I've had dozens of death threats resulting from my controversial newspaper articles, including getting dead animals mailed to me. I have sat at the end of a shotgun for 5 hours in a counseling case that was obviously going very, very badly. And I have had to be involved with families that were beset with domestic violence. But the trauma that I've obsessed about happened in 2007 when I was forced to resign from a church where I'd been the pastor for 16 years. And since that time, I hate to say this out loud, but I have gained nearly 100 pounds and have spent countless nights without sleep, sometimes night after night, lying awake and just replaying the trauma of broken relationships, of religious hypocrisy, and betrayal over and over and over. So during these past 12 years, especially in the immediate years following that tragic summer, I've seen several doctors to ask for help with my sleep issues and my weight gain. And I want to tell you this. I have physicians whom I love, who are smart, caring, professional people. They have tried through prescription medications to address my sleep disturbance and nearly elephantine appetite. What none of these very educated professional women and men have ever done is to ask me why I have trouble sleeping, or to ask me why I overeat. One physician friend who knew what I was going through simply walked up to me in the aisle of the church, put a big bottle of Prozac in my coat pocket and patted it and said, "Take one a day until I tell you to stop." What Dr. Paul and I will talk about more next week is the fact that sleep disturbance is typically a sign of clinical depression. Excessive eating is often, not always, but often a result of trauma. No one in the medical profession ever had the temerity to suggest to me that I might be depressed or that my sleep disorder or my weight were symptoms rather than the disease. My weight is the result of a larger problem and not in and of itself the problem, in spite of all of the social and health implications that it does have. If I may, please allow me to make a glancing reference to one of Aesop's fables. When Andronicus was faced with a raging lion who was suffering from terrible pain from a thorn in his paw, Andronicus did not offer the lion a prescription for OxyContin. The lion did not need to be doped up on painkillers. He needed to have the thorn removed. Isn't that obvious? Depression is a symptom. Sleep disturbance is a symptom. Obesity is a symptom. You do not catch a fever. A fever is a symptom of an infection. And frankly, sometimes it's a helpful one because raising your body temperature can kill the bug that is infecting you. There's something to be said for sweating it out sometimes. But what we should be doing is listening to our depression, listening to our symptoms to say, what is this telling us about where the thorn is? I appreciate the doctor who wanted to give me antidepressants, but I did not take them because I know that statistically they make absolutely no difference in depression. They don't digest, they go into the water system. We are all getting a dose of vitamin Prozac every time we take a drink of water now. But the side effects, in spite of the fact that it doesn't actually work on depression, is a loss of libido, weight gain, and suicidal ideation. That's a big price to pay for virtually no help. I knew that I had a reason to be depressed, and I would much rather deal with the reason than with the symptom. A very bright and sincerely compassionate doctor gave me a prescription for Ambien to help me sleep. I didn't take it because while there are prescriptions that will either help you to sleep or make you sleep, they are all highly addictive, all of them, no exceptions, regardless of what anybody else says. They have very destructive side effects that can include sleepwalking or sleep driving or sleep telephone calls, all of which could get me some very unsavory coverage in the local newspaper. In the same way, I have from time to time had minor surgery and been given narcotic pain relievers for afterward, and I'll tell you, I've never taken a single one of them because I believe there are things worse than pain, and I've seen it in the lives of people that have become addicted to pain relievers. Now, I'm not saying I will never take them, but as long as I can make a conscious decision to endure the pain, I won't, because I know the 62,000 deaths from overdoses of narcotic drugs is not just an accident. It's something that can capture anyone, and I don't want to be one of those people. I'm certain that you remember the constant barrage of TV commercials for the headache remedy, Head On, apply directly to the forehead. There are no active ingredients in Head On. It afforded no medical benefit whatsoever, but for a time there were people who believed that it did. It's kind of like, what is that emergency that you take before you get on an airplane? There is no medical scientific reason to ever do that. However, if you believe in magic, if you really, really, really believe in fairies, sometimes it works. If you believe that getting your spine adjusted helps you, then whew, I guess it helps you. If wearing copper or magnets helps you, then great. It doesn't really, but the human psyche is a very complicated thing. And so psychosomatic cures sometimes work because in our heads we believe that they work. It's that simple. I never use Ambien to go to sleep, but for years I have known that there was a bottle of Ambien in my bathroom. So when I couldn't sleep, I didn't panic about not sleeping because I knew I could make myself sleep, but I'd rather be awake than take that stuff. I could force myself, but you know, there are better ways to go to sleep. What is more natural than going to sleep? Turn out the lights, turn off the television, don't look at your screens, get quiet and go to sleep. There should be nothing more fundamentally natural to us than sleeping. Now, back to pulling the thorn out of your paw. I mentioned last week that the trauma we were imposing on children at the border would have horrible impacts on their mental health as adults. There's no way to go back and undo that. So, when you talk about pulling the thorn, sometimes things have happened that you cannot undo. I wish I could go back to the year 2000 and live the last several years of my denominational parish life differently, but I can't go back to 2007 and undo what happened. Every day I talk with people who were sexually assaulted as children or who have been the victims of domestic violence. I sheltered a friend of mine in my home for several months this year whose ex had set her house on fire while she was asleep in it, and she was being treated for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, you can't undo that. She's rebuilding the house, and she thinks that somehow restoring the house means he doesn't win. But I know the effect of that fear and that trauma of nearly dying in a house fire never really goes away. There are things that happen that are so traumatic that we cannot help, that we somatize them. That is, the trauma, the psychological affect comes out in our bodies. The word psychosomatic is about how the mind and the body are connected. And there are times when that's fairly easy to see, but sometimes it's not easy to see, but it is always there. One of my professors used to say that if we could actually achieve mental health in our society, that we would close our hospitals except for staunching wounds and setting broken bones. Well, now that may be an overstatement, but it isn't too much of an overstatement, that a tremendous amount of our illnesses have to do with this connection between mind and body. Where traditional medicine often relies upon pharmaceuticals to solve every problem, I think it also has to be said that psychotherapy often spends way too much time and energy focusing on problems. Like sitting down with a dangerous lion and saying, "Tell me how you feel about the thorn in your paw." We schedule week after week after week to go in and talk to a therapist about our parents, about an ex-spouse, about a former employer. We talk about our problems and feed them and feed them and feed them. If you keep feeding the monster gets bigger and stronger, right? Everyone tends to remember Abraham Maslow for his famous pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. And as helpful as this may be for introductory psychology classes to help 18-year-old students to think about how their minds work, this is far from being Maslow's greatest contribution to the field of counseling. Maslow realized that counseling involved way too much time and energy focused on where a patient is hurting and not nearly enough where their strengths are. Positive psychology, which we'll be talking about a lot for the next few weeks and at our conference, is focused on living a good, productive, and happy life that overpowers the trauma and the pain of the past. It's Todd Scheibel, the now deceased former director at Burrell, had a saying. It was apocryphal, but he brought it up all the time in board meetings. He said that when he bought his first house, the yard was spotty and had lots of weeds, and he kept going and trying to get weed killers, and finally some old sage said to him, "Son, you need to concentrate on growing grass instead of killing weeds." Well, that's really where we need to be in terms of positive psychology. We need to focus on growing grass and quit trying to kill the weeds. I went to counseling after my divorce. I wanted to be vulnerable and say, as Freud said, I have thoroughly examined myself and found that I do not need to change much. But I was willing to say, what am I doing wrong? Where are my mistakes in this? And I went through a pretty exhaustive battery of psychological testing. And this therapist, Dr. Cox at now defunct Forrest School of Psychology, only had 4 sessions with me. And he said, you need to stop thinking about a failed relationship and concentrate your energy on your profession, which I think was very helpful. My profession is helping people who are in crisis and speaking truth to power about social ills. If you can't feel good about yourself when you're doing that, you've got a cold, hard place where your heart was supposed to be. So I think he was helpful by not coddling me and having me come week after week after week. He just said, this is sad. This is very sad your marriage failed. I'm very sorry about that. Now go back to work and show me what kind of good work you can do. And I think that was what I needed to hear. There's been a fake meme that's made the rounds on social media a lot, and I don't want to show it all here because we are, after all, in church. Freud didn't say this, but it's nonetheless true. Before you assume that there's something wrong with you, that diagnosing yourself with depression or low self-esteem, don't underestimate the possibility that you might be surrounded by jerks. There could be something wrong with your brain or with your diet or with your environment, but we have a saying in psychology that when you hear hoofbeats, you tend to think horses and not zebras. Acknowledging that there are sometimes organic causes of emotional pain, more often there is a lack of vital connections, real and meaningful friendships, a healthy love life, work or volunteerism in which you believe that you are making a difference and a real contribution to the world. As Viktor Frankl said, if you have a why to live, you can live with almost any how. My modest suggestion is that we choose to focus on why we're living and not worry so much about how we're living.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.